We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. But the thing that we often forget is that it also takes one to support the mother.
Well, speaking of the village, this is our podcast. I'm Nicole Harlow.
And I'm Dawn Thompson. And we're here to connect you with a village of support you need from pregnancy to parenting.
So come on this journey with us as we build your village one episode at a time. Hello. I am so excited to be here today. I am joined by a beautiful new friend of mine, Amy Bauer, and we are going to get started talking about how to be a consumer in the birth world. I think this is a super important topic, and I'm really excited to discuss. But before we start, Amy, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your history?
Sure, I'd love to. I am the mother of 5, and I sort of began my journey as a doula after my first pregnancy. Well, during my first pregnancy, I was just really, really afraid. I was afraid of, I wasn't actually even sure totally what I was afraid of, but everyone tells you a nasty story. And the way that birth is presented in the culture and everything. So I was very afraid. And my coping mechanism is to gather information. So I just started reading and researching and getting all that learning all that I could get my hands on. And this is, I'm not going to say how many years ago, but it was a few years ago. So we didn't have, information all at our fingertips like we do now. So I just did a lot of reading and talking to people. And one of the things that came out of all of that is hire a doula. One of, these books, I would see this word over and over, hire a doula. And I talked to my husband about it, and he wasn't super sure that he wanted to do that because I had him and he was going to do a great job, which he did do. My husband was very wonderful and supportive, but I kind of said, yeah, but you're not having the baby. I'm having the baby. So we decided to hire a doula. And it just so happened that when we were on our hospital tour, there was a lady there whose husband was out of town, and her doula was taking the hospital tour with her. And they were in the back of the room asking all of my questions before I could ask them. So that's who I ended up hiring. And long story short, I had an extremely empowering birth experience. And because of that, I decided to dump my college major, which was audiology, and start trying to give women the same kind of positive experience that I had. And I supported my first birth about 3 months after my first baby was born.
Wow.
It was totally crazy because I started out as a backup for my doula, and my mom, who lives really close, would bring the baby to the hospital, and I would run down to the waiting room and nurse her, and then go back up to the moms. So it was quite a journey. But the point is that I just really gained a passion for wanting women to have the same positive, empowering experience that I had. My doula was with me for all 5 of my babies. And then later I became an activist. I met Dawn, and we did Improving Birth together, and we did some legislative work in DC together. And then fast forward a few more years, and I had been teaching childbirth at a hospital here. And I sort of collaborated with them, and they encouraged me to start an agency. So that's how Who's Your Doula Network came to be. And then moving forward, we just keep on trying to expand so that we are able to help more and more women.
That's awesome. I have a very similar journey, Amy. I mean, you kind of already know, but what drove you to that, doing the network thing? Was it because I'm going to say immediately that part of the reason that a lot of doulas wind up going out and doing so many other things or getting additional trainings and everything is often because we can't have a living wage just being a doula. It's very, very challenging to do that. And I think a lot of people, thankfully the cost of doulas is going up. Thankfully for us, it's not great for a lot of the moms out there, but I think it's an interesting thing. And so was that part of the drive to do that too?
Yes and no. It was, but one of the things is that doula care also needs to be sustainable. Yeah. I was a doula for a long time, kind of on my own. So I struggled to go on vacation. I had trouble, being a present for my kids if they had games and events and things like that. And my answer, and still to this day, my answer to everyone is, can you do this or that? And it's always like, well, if no babies come, I will. But there are those things that you need to be able to do for your regular life, but you have to be able to guarantee that you can help these moms. So when I started the agency, I kind of consider that I have two clients, right? I have doulas, and I'm attempting to make their life easier and for them to be able to make better money, more consistency, and also to have like that support system and the backup. We also, we provide a sort of a turnkey system for them. So they don't have to deal with money and paperwork and all of that. So in addition to the referrals and things that they get from the agency, we also try to make it more sustainable for them. Nice. So I have some doulas who are now, because they work for us, they're able to take maybe more births on than they would feel comfortable doing otherwise, because they know that if they can't make it to a birth, they've got a safety net.
Yeah, they've got a backup. So let's, obviously the main part of our podcast and what we're doing is really to help the consumer. And so I guess one of the questions I'd love to know is like, what do you think is the main reason right now after all these years of experience? I mean, how many births have you attended?
I don't know, because I didn't start counting. Like later people started asking me, and I would say it's got to be approaching 1,000, somewhere in that area, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I'm the same. I lost count a long time ago. I don't even know for myself.
But what I can say definitively is 30 years.
Yes.
I've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah, so. That's amazing. So talk to me about what do you think the number one thing is that consumers need to know? Like, why do you think they need doulas?
Well, honestly, I think that, it's funny. People ask me, they used to, they don't so much anymore, but when I started doing this, no one had ever heard of a doula. And so I would have to explain to everyone what it was. And they would always say, oh, is that new? Is that a new thing? And I would be like, well, yes and no. Like, this is how birth has always been done, right? This is something that's been lost from birth, is women coming together around each other and helping and supporting them. I say that's probably the first part, is that you don't know how much support you're going to need until you're there. But also, I think, secondly, because the system is the way that it is, I think a lot of women, they get pregnant, they walk into their birth, they go to the hospital and they think it's all going to be in their best interest and everyone's going to be looking out for them and doing the best. And although I do think that is the general motive of everyone, I think the nature of the system is such that women don't understand how much need they're going to have.
Yeah.
We have this is America, right? This is the US of A. We have the best care, right? We don't need extra stuff. Why should I spend extra money to have someone come in here and rub my back or whatever? I think that doulas, first of all, they do a lot more than that, but also I don't think that most women understand what the need really will be. That's probably the most challenging thing about marketing doula care, especially to first timers, is that until you've been through it and you've seen how it works, especially in the system, it's hard to know what your need will be.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
That's right. And I have a great story about that, actually, that I'd love to share, because I think this is a great opportunity. This was 10 years into my career. I'd been doing it a long time. I was getting to that place of no, I'm worth far more than what I've been charging. And I started increasing my rates. I wound up being one of the most expensive in my community. This couple interviewed me, and the dad was a total sales rep guy, right? And he's like, so help me explain why I should pay you this higher amount when I can get somebody else for $400 less.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, 10 years of experience. That's what you're going to get. And listen, if that's going to make a difference for you in your pocketbook, then by all means go hire that person. But he was trying to get me to reduce my price.
Sure.
And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not reducing my price because I'm worth every penny. And it was the first time that I actually got into this place of self-worth, even for me, because there was many times that I would discount my prices and all these things. And then I was exhausted, and I was sometimes making pennies, right? Pennies per hour.
Sure.
And so, but anyways, needless to say, they had a pretty challenging birth for their first birth, but they wanted to go unmedicated. She was successful in doing that. But at the end, excuse me, he actually he hired me. In the end, when I did my exit interview or my postpartum interview with them, he was like, "You don't charge enough."
Right. Yep.
And not only that, is then he wound up being probably one of my biggest father champions of all. They referred me to so many of their friends. He was like in his office, there was so many pregnant people, and he was like, "Dude, you need a doula.
Yes.
Don't pass go. Like, there's no question." And he not only did he pay my full fee, but then he added another $200 or $400 tip, and then he gave me a $200 gift card to a restaurant.
Wow.
And he was just like, "You don't charge enough, and I need to figure out how to get you paid more." Like, he was like dialing in his head. So,
well,
that's not a testament.
I think that's amazing. And, Amy, you said earlier, and I haven't heard this before, that you had the same doula for all 5 of your births.
Yes.
Well, I had the same doula for all 4 of my births. And typically, people don't find the doula until they're, they have a first traumatic birth, and then they're like, "Oh, I need support next time," or, whatever. Where I was terrified of giving birth when I first got pregnant. So I told my husband, non-negotiable, we're hiring a doula. And I hired a doula team from an agency, because I was like, wait, there's 2 of them, and they both had everything the other didn't. This agency kind of paired people that one had rebozo, one had lactation, one had, belly binding, whatever, all the extras, they kind of really balanced each other out. And that was a big reason for me going with an agency doula over a independent doula for my first birth. Now, hiring her through the preceding births, I just hired her because we just so connected on a soul level. And now she's one of my best friends. But from
that
a consumer, from a consumer standpoint, and just kind of leading into this question, I know why I, again, hired the agency doula over an independent doula for my first birth. What are the benefits of, from a consumer standpoint, going with a agency versus independent? And then what are the benefits, you kind of touched on them already, but of being part of an agency as a doula versus an independent?
That's a great question. So from a consumer standpoint, and at least the way we do things, so because I came to doula care as a consumer in the first place, everything that I do and the policies that I put in place for my agency are done sort of from the standpoint of, okay, if I was the consumer in this scenario, what would I want to be done? Mm-hmm. So that's how we handle we don't do a rotation on call like the OB providers do, for that reason, because this is, this is personalized care. So we want it to remain personal, but also you're always going to have a guarantee of a doula. If something happens, if your doula has a car accident on the way to your birth, I have a list I can call down, and there's going to be somebody there. Also, we try to keep that personal component there, because we use software where the doula who has the client will make all the prenatal notes of all of, everything that they talk about and what the client wants. And then if something happens, and then that's private, nobody else gets to see that except for the doula that you hire. But then if that doula has to pass your case on to a backup, which really only happens about 6% of the time, then that doula will add the backup doula to the file. So all of the notes of everything that the client wants. So yes, you are sort of cold turkey walking into a birth with someone you don't necessarily know, but they know what you want. And they're going to provide you with what you need, so that that's not a stranger coming to you to try and support you. So the individualized care, we take that very seriously. And then also, I think just continuity, like all of my doulas they're trained the same way. We all have the same skills in terms of, like, we all do spinning babies, and we all, there are different trainings that we take, because like there are home birth midwives in the area who want the doulas, for example, to have neonatal resuscitation, not because we're going to be involved in that, but because if that scenario happens in a home birth, then we're able to know what's happening and facilitate what's happening and not be in the way and not, cause problems. So just basically in terms of our trainings, the consistency, and the personalized care, I think, is where the client would benefit the most from hiring an agency. And at least for my agency, I'm sorry, I'm just going to plug it. My doulas are the most amazing. Like, I won't work with just any doula. I will not send a doula out to your birth if I would not be willing to have her at mine.
I love that. I wish there was, ultimately you're speaking to this agency idea, but it's fairly new, and it's not like, there's not everywhere, there's not doula agencies everywhere yet. So, if you're listening to this as a consumer, you may not be able to find an agency in your community, but most doulas do at least have backup care, somebody that they team up with. I mean, I know I did back in the day. I had, Colleen was my thank God for her sometimes, but yeah. I did go into a birth cold once. I
have before, and that's really hard. But also currently I have 10 doulas working for my agency, and I have actually had it where I called down the whole list and I was able to find one person who was available to go to a birth. So that's one of the things that, like, another benefit of the agency is it's not just one backup. Like, what if something happens to both of you? Or, so I feel more comfortable in terms of my own clients being part of the agency. It has just, from a doula standpoint, it's really changed my life, because I have a life now. And I also am very confident that my clients are going to be well supported.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even tell you how many birthdays, holidays, all the things that I've missed throughout the years, There's nothing worse than when your tradition is with all your kids to open presents on Christmas morning, and you're like, sorry about it. You guys are going to have to wait.
Postponed. Yep.
Yeah. Postponed. Sorry about it. Yeah. But thankfully my family's always been pretty, understanding, but I don't do in-person birth much anymore at all, but I've, busy doing other things, but I get it. Right.
I actually don't do as much as I used to either, because I'm trying to be the rainmaker for my doulas. So yeah, we get a lot of, another thing, when you become an activist, and I'm sure you know this, Dawn, you get a lot of, like, area name recognition. Like, we've been in the paper, we had our rallies, everybody sort of knows, my name to begin with. And then, so that's one of the things that gives me the ability to be the rainmaker for my doulas. So I'm trying to, pass things on more. And I still have to keep my hand in, though. Like, when I have repeat clients or people who are just dear to my heart, or, somebody that's had, like, a super traumatic birth and they're trying for a VBAC, and they just really, really, sometimes you just have to do it yourself.
Yes. Those VBACs are the ones that get me every time because of my own story. Right. And also I just, I've helped so many people through that VBAC process that I've become, pretty darn passionate about it. And I just want them to have the best experience. And I know what I can do. right? Like I know
Yes.
how I can help. And,
Yes.
you know, I know I'm not sending them out there with just some random doula who's been doing it for 2 years or something, you know, and like,
Yeah.
because time just gives you a skill that you can't get any other way. It's not to not to insult those doulas. I don't mean that at all, you know, but it just, it's time and experience goes a long way.
And sometimes you just have a connection with the person too. Like it's very hard to turn a client over sometimes to a backup because you're so invested in their success that you're just like, okay, maybe I can rearrange this.
I'll do it.
I'll just do it. I made a promise to my husband this year already that I would not take any births in December. Like we have so many family birthdays in December, and you know we've got grandkids and Christmas and all that stuff. And I said, okay, this year I'm not going to be on call in December. And then one of my best friend's daughters, she called me and told me about her pregnancy before she told her mom. Like she hired me before I was even allowed to tell her mom that she was pregnant. And I'm like, honey, I gotta take this one. I have to. So yeah.
Your best laid plans, right?
Yeah, it is what it is. It will be a joyous occasion regardless.
So you said something, Amy, about, you know, it's not just the next on-call provider, right? So in my first birth experience, it was a hospital birth, and I was with a practice that had, you know, multiple OBs, and I had to meet with every single one of them during my pregnancy. So I would know who was on call, except they also partnered with another OB practice, and none of them were on call for my birth. So the person that delivered my first baby, I had never seen before in my life. And again, it was a fine experience, you know, looking back, there was no trauma associated, but the cold, you know, provider, as I guess you can call it, is a huge thing. And I think women who are expecting and moms who maybe had a traumatic birth and want to hire a doula the second time, that's something really important, that like familiarity in the person supporting you. So do you have like meet and greets for your agency that they can come and actually meet the other doulas? Or is there a way that, you know, even if they're not necessarily matched with one, is that an opportunity for them? And I know, again, every agency is going to be different. Your agency is one way, other agencies across the country can manage themselves very differently, but just out of curiosity.
Well, we actually COVID really affected this. We used to do quarterly meet the doulas. So we would have a meeting, the doulas would bring snacks, and any couples who wanted to come in and meet the whole clan, you know, they could do that. That kind of fell to the wayside after COVID. I think so. What we put in its place is that clients can interview with as many doulas until they find the right fit. So, and we don't charge for our interviews. So, and we allow them to do an in-person if they want to. And I always kind of recommend that because in-person is just superior. It's just better. But they can also do something like what we're doing here, like a Google Meets or a FaceTime or something, in order, you know, if they have a lot of time constraints and they don't want to deal with all of these different interviews. But that's how we've tried to work around that. And I think at this point we probably could get back to our meet and greets. We just haven't. So
yeah. Well, awesome. Yeah, I think COVID definitely rocked a lot of industries in some weird ways, and we're still, it's still 4 years later, which is wild to say.
Right. Well, I mean, ultimately, COVID is what inspired Birthify, right? Who, you know, is because when COVID happened, I was already kind of leaning towards not doing in-person birth anymore. And we had decided that we were going to move out of the country potentially. And we had this big trip planned to go check out another country to live. And I was, I'd already been doing this process of like, okay, how do I still make money? Right. And because of the reputation that I had built up, I was getting calls and texts and emails from all over the place of like, can you please talk to my friend? Can you, like all these things.
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe I should kind of start charging for my time instead of just giving it away freely. Right. And so I thought, well, that's how I could do it. I mean, I have so much to offer besides being in person. It's like, the realization was that, 80% of our job as doulas is educational and informational and guidance. And just that small 20% is what happens in the hospital room where we're rubbing backs and squeezing hips, right? Like, right. It's just, that's really, even though it's the bulk of our time, probably, it's certainly not the most important aspect of what we do. And so when COVID hit, I was kind of like, and everybody was panicking, right? Because suddenly people were not only losing their doulas, but they weren't even being able to go into the hospital with their partner, right? And suddenly they were going to be birthing alone with just a nurse. And that nurse was going to be coming in occasionally. And I just saw both the parents and the doulas kind of losing it. I literally 24 hours, I put up a website called Virtual Doula Now. And I started training. We trained like 80 doulas in the first 3 weeks of like how to do virtual education and virtual support. And then we started having families trickle in because they were searching virtual doula. Right. And so then we saw this need. And so we started now merging these two together. Like we just trained this person in your zip code or in your area code or whatever, or in your region at that point. And like this person can be available for you. And so it wound up being obviously driving a whole entire new business for me.
Well, and I think that's a really important point to make is that for those consumers, for those expecting moms who are listening, an in-person doula may be just not the right fit for you for any reason.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other options. There is virtual support. There is classes and childbirth education that you can take to, with your partner if they're the ones that are very adamant about being your person. Because I know we hear that a lot. Well, my husband, well, my partner, that. Yep. So, Amy, if you wanted to talk maybe about some of those other options that you've witnessed or have managed over the years and, how to be that consumer.
Well, first I'd really I'm glad you asked about other options because Who's Your Doula is launching a new project, sort of piggybacking rather off of what Dawn said. We saw that same need and people were, calling us and, we're on the phone with people while they're having their babies and whatever. And so that actually, because I agree that 80%-ish of what we do, and maybe even some of the most important part of what we do actually happens in our prenatal meetings and the things that when we're educating women and helping them understand what they're going to come up against and helping them sort of navigate what their questions are and things like that, we decided that we were going to launch an app so that they would have all of this information at their fingertips. So if they were able to have an in-person doula, don't make any mistake, there's no substitute for having an in-person doula at your birth. You just can't. That's the gold standard, right? But not everybody can do that. And if you can't do it, we have developed an app called Pocket Doula. And it is going to be, we've launched a few modules so far, but we will be, as we go forward, we're going to be having all sorts of information that they can actually have right in their pocket when they're in the birthing room if they need to reference positions or coping mechanisms, or, there's going to be childbirth education classes. And our first product is called How to Banish Fear from Your Childbirth. So we're very excited about this project, and it's because exactly of what you said, Dawn, that the needs are changing, and the ability to meet those needs is also limited. Even like you said, not everyone in this economy, not everyone can afford what they would consider an extra. Knowing what I know, I wouldn't consider a doula an extra, but if I was a first-time mom and I didn't understand, yeah, that's maybe not something that's right in the budget for them. But
Right.
if they can download this app, and at least they can have, references and support. So
Right.
that is our current project, and we're very excited about launching that. So
Well, and Birthify is the next level of that, right? And the thing that we wanted to address was, I'm very passionate about how high the C-section rate and induction rate is in this country. We have some of the worst maternal health outcomes in the developed world. That should be a red flag to everyone. And that means to me, you and I have talked about this, Amy, Nicole, you and I have talked about this too. I don't believe that nurses and doctors go to the office every day thinking like, ooh, who can we traumatize today? I think that they you know what I mean? Like the majority of them are good people, but they have been brought up in a system that has to worry about financial concerns, liability concerns, and even time constraints. I mean, like they don't want somebody in that bed for, 4 days, right? Like, they want to just move things along. And
also the fear. Don't forget, the whole system runs on fear. Yes. It's not, and it's not just fear. Like I talked about, my fear, and Nicole, you talked about your fear. But it's also provider fear. Providers they have fear of litigation. They have, a standard of practice, so that it's sort of like a groupthink idea. So it might be fear of, how other people see this practice or whatever. And also I think that maternity care has become very centralized. So it used to be that, you had an individual OB over here and an individual OB over here. And yeah, they might collaborate and back up for each other, but they ran their own practices. And so they were able to sort of do what they want. But now it's all ruled by somebody in a boardroom somewhere that doesn't have that. They're looking at the bottom line. No, they're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at how to run this as a business.
Yes.
And I had a provider tell me one time that offering VBAC was the worst business decision she ever made, until she realized that, yes, they were going to have to sacrifice, how they scheduled things and patient hours and all of that. But every woman in a 60-mile radius of their hospital wanted them. So she didn't learn that until she offered it.
Yeah.
So from a business standpoint, it doesn't make any sense for them to do it.
Yeah. One of our guests is Amber Price, that's coming up. I don't know when she's scheduled, but she's one of our guests. She's the first midwife ever to now be the CEO of a hospital. She is and this is like her fourth. I'm sorry?
Where?
She's in Virginia, but this is her fourth hospital that she's been at, and she's climbed that ladder. And at the last hospital she was at, she was the COO. And she has like this whole process of and she said it takes her about 1.5 years to convince the doctors that she knows what she's talking about. Yes. and that she's going to improve their practice, improve their income, and improve outcomes, reduce cesareans, reduce inductions, and improve breastfeeding.
Yes.
And she has been successful at that at every hospital that she has been to, that she's been in a position of power. And I'm excited to talk to her because, it's really introducing a new thought process, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, you said she so many times there, and that's the really important part I think we need to discuss, is because those people in the boardroom looking at the bottom line and the business and the money are typically, I won't say always, but typically men, or very, I don't want to say masculine women, not in appearance, but in this thought process of it needs to be linear. It needs to be about money. It needs to not be about the experience and the trauma and the human that's on the bed.
Well, but they're often they've never been at the bedside. They're business.
Exactly. They're
MBA
not
people,
they don't
right?
understand.
Yeah. And I mean, I wouldn't even say that that's a gender issue as much as it, I mean, obviously it plays into it, but I think not being by bedside and have never, ever cared for a patient. I always kind of laugh about how people go to pediatricians for like breastfeeding advice and things like that. It's like, how many hours does that pediatrician actually have caring for an infant besides their own? Caring for an infant, seeing an infant for 20 minutes in your office 75,000 times is very different than caring for a child, And so, but anyways, it's that same kind of idea.
I think sorry, go ahead.
I had a friend who the doctor that delivered her baby, and I hate even using that term, but literally walked in and said, how many times have you done this? I've done this 200 times. And I wanted to like go through, I was talking to her via video chat. I wanted to go through and like strangle this man because I was like, dude, you're a guy. You've never done this. You have witnessed it 200 times, whatever, if you want to throw that number around, but you've never actually done it. And same thing, and again, if that was a woman doctor who had never had a baby too, same thing, but like these people are so far removed from the actual experience of birth that
I actually said that to one of my OBs when I was delivering one of my babies. He was a male, and he was telling me not to push, and it wasn't for like a problematic reason. It was a scheduling type reason. And I just snapped at him and said, and how many babies have you pushed out of your vagina? Like, I'm just wondering, like, do you
no, that's like not a thing. Don't push. I mean, we could go on and on that one.
That's true. The bedside is important though. You are familiar with Dr. Neil Shaw.
Of course.
That's why I have so much respect for him, because he is trying to teach that out to his students. He's a professor, and he has been by the bedside. And I love his quote about doulas, where he says, I didn't know until I knew. Like that was his thing, is that he didn't understand what a doula brought to a birth until
well, and I think that's our biggest challenge as doulas, is that people do not understand it. It's the thing that we keep talking about at Birthify over and over. It's like, okay, so you don't want someone in person with you, but the information is beyond valuable of what we can share with you. And I'm always thinking about like one of the things that turned me into an advocate versus just being a doula, because there is a difference. Right? You and I both know this. There are some doulas that do not believe in advocacy. They believe that they're there to rub your feet and not say anything and not educate you, but just be emotional and physical support. Then there's other of us who have become advocates because it's necessary. And it's a necessity that we become advocates. And one of the things was, I had this doctor that I worked with all the time. I really loved her. She referred me patients. I referred her patients. It was great. But I quickly started realizing that she was inducing all of her patients. And I was just like, and all of these people were coming to me because they didn't want any interventions. They wanted to have a normal physiological birth. And many of them even wanted an unmedicated birth. And so I noticed the pattern. And I started saying to them when they would hire me, I would say, okay, listen, I love her. She's got she's respectful. She's got great bedside manner, all these things. But here's what you need to know. She is at your 36-week appointment, she's going to do an ultrasound, and she's going to tell you that the baby is getting too big.
Yes.
And then she's going to say, we're probably going to need to do an induction at 39 weeks. I know there are so many people listening to this episode right now that are going to be like,
this is what happened to me.
That happened to me. Yeah.
Yes.
And then at 37 weeks, she would do the same thing. She would measure and she'd be like, oh yeah, we definitely are going to need, this baby is just it's too big. You're too small, blah, 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 whatever. And so but what was happening was then those at 36 weeks, they would call me, or that 37-week appointment after it, they'd be like, oh my God, I didn't want to get an induction. She's telling me my baby's clavicle might break. I might injure my baby. And like all this stuff. And then I was having to like talk them off the ledge. which is much, much harder. And by the way, then I'm like a doula stepping out of my scope, right? Of saying like, I know, we can get into that whole
depends on how you define it.
I see the face. I see the face. But here's the thing. It's like, I was just like, okay, but here's what the evidence says about big baby. Here's what the evidence says. And then, but a lot of the times it was too late. The doctor knows best mentality would win out, and we'd end up in a cesarean. Right.
Well,
and it would happen so often. But let me tell you this part. So then I started telling them ahead of time. I'd go, okay, so this is what she's going to do at 36 weeks. But here's the evidence. Here's the research on big baby. Induction for big baby is not supported. C-section for estimated 11 pounds or bigger. Your baby is not 11 pounds. I'm like, I can visually see that, like I can tell you're not that big. And so they would read this information and they would go to her and they'd be like, oh, we're good. We're not going to induce. We've read through all this research and we're good with not doing an induction for big baby. We're okay. And she would just be like, okay. Like she would not try to convince them. She would nothing, whatever. And she would say, and then she'd say, well, just understand that if you go into labor naturally, I may not be there. So what she was doing was then saying like, that's really the reason I was inducing you, was because I wanted to be there for your birth. Because by the way, I don't get paid unless I actually attend your birth. Right? Nobody's having that conversation about how practices are set up, where if you do the delivery, you're the one getting paid in the practice. It doesn't matter how many things that you just did. But anyways, and it was amazing how much my C-section rate and induction rate dropped just by doing that one thing.
Well, I think that leads very well into this idea of being a consumer, because I think that what you need to do as a client, and this is what I try to teach my clients to do for themselves, is to spend some time planning and understanding and asking questions and gathering research. I talk about this in the article that I wrote for the new magazine that you have coming out, that there's 4 very simple steps to sort of taking back your birth and owning it as a consumer. And the first one is to know who you are. So you have to understand that everybody involved in this transaction is under you, whether that's how it's perceived or not. These people work for you. You employ them. They are the consultants. You're hiring them because they're so knowledgeable and you're so happy that they're there to help you. But you're the project manager. You're the one who's in the driver's seat. And that's the first thing that you have to own and stand in to be able to go forward as a consumer. Then the next thing you need to do is figure out what's important to you. Like every woman has, there are as many ideal birth scenarios as there are women, right? Not everybody is going to be comfortable with the same things. A lot of our clients want the natural physiological birth, but not everybody does. Some people want, all the things. So I think it's important to figure out what kind of birth experience that you actually see as your ideal, so that you can look for the birth team that's going to be the most in line with that, right? And then after that, you have to do a little bit of research, a little bit of looking into, okay, who are these providers? Like what kind of provider am I looking for? Do I want a midwife? Do I want a doctor? Why? What kind of surgical stats do these people have? What kind of, and if maybe you don't know, so you ask people, which is a great strategy, but you also have to know who you're asking, right? If you're asking somebody who's like, oh, give me the epidural when I walk in the door, that person's not going to have the same standards for a care provider as somebody who shares your personal desires. If you're like, no, I would like to do everything as hands-off as I possibly can. So you need to be careful that way. I think tapping the doulas in your area and
Yes.
saying, hey, who's a good doctor? Who does the most C-sections? Like, who do you think is the most respectful? So in the article, one thing that I talk about is our system is set up so that we just automatically take who our insurance gives us and, hope for a good Yelp review somewhere.
Totally.
But you don't go and hire someone to build a house for you just because they're the cheapest builder. Being a doctor or a midwife, earning that qualification doesn't make you a good doctor or a good midwife. There are plenty of amazing doctors and midwives, but just because they are a doctor or midwife doesn't mean they're good at it. So you need to know what you're looking for and find out if the person that you're hiring to do this for you is going to be in line with that. And my most important thing, literally the most important thing, demand respect from your provider.
Yes.
Your providers command respect from you. And I promise you, because of the way that they've been trained and the way that they practice, they're not going to put up with it if you don't respect them. They'll drop you like a hot potato, and they should be respected. We should be giving them the respect that they deserve. But if they don't respect you, see ya.
Yeah.
That is the absolute lowest common denominator. If you have a doctor or provider that's saying things to you like, we're going to let you do this, we're going to allow you to do that, that's a huge red flag for me.
Huge.
Or other things like, oh, did you get that information from Dr. Google? Or are you a doctor? All these kind of things. Any kind of language like that from a provider, no.
Yeah.
I have no patience for any of that. But I think that women actually go into this transaction with the idea that this doctor actually has authority over them, some sort of authority.
Right.
And they absolutely don't.
None.
Well, that's the conditioning of our society of this prestigious. It's actually, with my NLP training, it's called like a prestige suggestion, where anyone in authority in your subconscious essentially is saying, oh, they're, a teacher, a police officer, a doctor, a politician, anyone in that pedestal, you're supposed to, submit, bow down. But like reality is the opposite.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of my practice trying to teach my clients to own that. And I tell them, when you go in to talk to your provider about X, Y, and Z, they're going to say, this is the way we do it. And that's fine if that's okay with you. But if it's not, that doesn't mean it's the way you have to do it. It means This is the way they do it. And you can say, not this time. This time we're going to do it this way.
I love Tracy Doula. Her quote is, keep your power in the process. I love it. I love it. I love it. I think it's so critical. And the number one thing for how you keep your power in the process is not to ask questions, but to make statements about what it is that you want. There's a big difference between asking permission, if I can go to the bathroom, versus saying, I need to go to the bathroom. How do I make that happen?
Correct. And I think that's really interesting too, because when I teach my doulas, I always say the opposite, but for the doula, it is the opposite. So the client should be making statements. The doula should be asking questions, because the doula is never going to be accused of stepping outside her scope or doing anything that she's giving medical advice or things that she's not supposed to do if she's asking questions. You cannot get in trouble asking questions. So your doula, I always tell my clients, if you hear me asking your nurse or your doctor or you in front of them questions that you think that I should know the answers to, I'm helping you get the answers you need. I already know the answer. I'm asking because it's a question that you don't know to ask. So the doula should be asking questions, but the patients should be making statements.
That's right. That's right.
That's another Amy, to be a consumer.
Listen, Amy, we could probably go on this forever. We can have great conversations, and I'm sure that we will have you back on again, but we just want to take the time to thank you for coming on and joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And one last question before we end. So speaking of the village, Who is one person that's not a doula, because obviously we know doula is non-negotiable, in your village that you would say is a non-negotiable?
I think midwives. Midwives are it's a lost art. I think people think it's a lower standard of care, which is nothing could be further from the truth. It's the exact opposite. And I don't know. That's a tough question, because I also think that there's a missing piece in the postpartum section. We need to figure out a way to have postpartum support for women too. So
yeah,
I don't know. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you so much again for being on the show. And
Thank you. It was great to see you.
It was great to see you too. Love you so much. And I look forward to connecting again soon.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Speaking of the Village. If you love today's episode, make sure to hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
And remember, you're not alone. We're here, we're listening, and we're all in this together, because in our village, no mom walks alone.